42 this year, and my life has been very much separated into two distinct halves. Separated by probably what was the most significant period of my life in the terms of changing it. But 20 years ago, on the 14th of May 2001, I had spinal surgery. I had what's called an L4-5 microdiscectomy. For nearly 2 years previous, I had suffered chronic sciatica because of a prolapsed disc. Now, it took ages to actually diagnose it. When I got the MRI scans, it showed that I had a slip disc, is the classical term, and it was pushing directly on my sciatic nerve. And it was 2 years of hell. From a pain perspective, I could barely lift my left leg more than a few degrees before it felt like somebody was stabbing me in the buttock and the back of the leg. And the right leg not much more. And there was a constant dull ache all the time, down into my calf and into my foot. And then trying to sleep at night was utterly horrendous, because your spine stretches in the night time and moves, so I would quite often wake up in agony in the middle of the night. So it wasn't a nice period. Coupled that with the fact that I was also a student as well. I was a student nursery nurse, or as it's called now, an early years worker. I was trying to do my placement for that and all the work involved for that at the same time. And I used to play in a band too, so that I was trying to do all these things. But it had totally changed my life. I'd always been active, footballer, running, bit of cycling when I was a lot younger. And I was always quite vivacious and heart and soul of the party or whatever, but it just all went away. Couldn't do anything. From a physical point of view, I went from being really active to the most I could do was walk a few yards before I'd have to sit. So coupled at first, to help me with sleeping, the doctors gave me a prescription cocodamol, and so I used to take two before I went to sleep, and then about 4 hours later when I woke up, I would take another two because the pain was there. So my night's sleep used to be two halves. When the pills first kicked in, I would be sound asleep, but I'd be woken up with the pain in my buttock. It was just horrendous, which kind of made me a walking zombie all day. And at first I used to just take normal painkillers through the day to try and keep my prescription for trying to get some sleep at night. There were times where the sleep was so undisturbed I would try and stay awake for a whole couple of days, so that I would be so tired that I would almost pass out with sleep. So during the day I kind of lost my personality. Between the painkillers and the stress, I was devoid of personality, and it got more and more difficult to function with the pain during the day. I started taking the cocodamol during the day as well, which only made things worse. And I wouldn't say I was addicted, because I was taking them because I was genuinely in pain, but I was forgetful. I couldn't concentrate on anything. I know that one of the places I was as a student deserved so much better, because I just wasn't on my game at all. And I had to take some because I was in my band and I didn't want to let the other two in the band down. And I used to take them for playing gigs or going to practices and things like that. Standing up all the time, carrying the weight of your guitar, and I was a singer. So that was quite a stressful time. And that as well, I had a girlfriend at the time with a big family and lots of social functions, and she was a huge support, but I felt as if I didn't want to let her down and keep her back from anything. So going out and things like that, I would take more painkillers just to get through. And one of the first times it kind of dawned on me that the painkillers weren't good was I went on a night out and I had taken painkillers so I could survive the night out, and I had some beer as well. And the next day at my work, so I worked in a theme park at the time, but that's another story. People were saying they had seen me, they had spoken to me the night before, and I had no recollection of it. I remember going to a bar or a nightclub somewhere, I can't quite remember, and then I would remember waking up the next morning. And when it starts to take away bits of your memory, that's a worry. So it wasn't just the physical aspects, there was emotional trauma that made it horrendous. And all the time as well, because I had been young, because I had a metabolism as well, I'd always maintained a decent athletic, body, and it disappeared because basically the only thing I could do that I still get any enjoyment out was eating. So I started comfort eating quite a lot because it was the only thing that gave me any sort of joy whatsoever. So not only was I not burning calories, I was taking in more than I ever had before as well. So my weight ballooned over the time. I have stretch marks in places that usually only pregnant women would expect because I got so fat so quickly. And I would have to say that I didn't really do anything about that either for even a couple of years after the operation. But I had the operation and it was the single hardest thing I've ever went through. 2 or 3 days in hospital were just unbelievably hard. Waking up from the operation, you just feel awful. It's a 6.5-7 hour operation because you're in the neurology department. And I was in the Southern General in Glasgow. And you wake up and you're hallucinating and things because not only are you coming off all the general anaesthetic, but they're pumping you full of morphine as well because they've just drilled a hole in your spine and removed a bit of disc. And the rest of that night's a bit of a blur. I had one of those things where I could press the wee button and get more morphine, which was a help, but you kind of start to hallucinate and stuff, sometimes kind of a reaction to it. That and the fact that I was in agony as well. And the next morning after the operation, I know this might sound strange, for somebody who's I've cycled 200 plus kilometre days and been in races and everything, the hardest thing physically I have ever had to do is when the physios and 2 nurses came to get me up out of bed. I swore like a trooper as they were doing it and I kept apologising, but my God, the getting me up out of bed and helping me into pyjamas. Normally as an adult male, especially a young adult male, you'd be embarrassed about standing there in the nude way, but I didn't care. It was so uncomfortable. And they made me, or helped me walk literally, I don't know, a room that had about 4 beds in it, and there was a main door into that ward with the 4 beds, and I was nearest the window, and they made me walk to the door and back. And I've done a lot of things, but that is the single hardest physical effort I have done in my entire life. And the sweat was pouring out of me, and it was agony, and I nearly fainted as well because the nurse was carrying this bag of blood. And I asked her what it was, and she said it was the drain coming out my operation site. And just to get back to bed even after seeing that. But over the next 24 hours, I'm glad they made me do that, because, you know, over that 24 hours, they helped me up another couple of times. At the end of the day, I was going to the toilet on my own, and I made it out to the main desk and back on my own, and still had no feeling between my knees and my chest, because they'd been in moving nerves around it. Luckily that all came back, but it was kind of daunting. But I got out of hospital a few days later. Now instantly the sciatica was gone, and such a relief, and I felt so glad to be home, even though it was difficult. I phoned my uncle at the time, sadly no longer with us, but he had did something similar when he was younger, and he'd had it worse at a time where they didn't take out part of the disc. They used to take the whole disc out and fuse the vertebrae together. But he said to me, you know, he warned me, he said, you'll wake up the morning after your surgery and you will be in a lot of pain. He said, but it'll be the best pain ever, because it's going to cure the problem. And that's how I felt. The sciatica was gone, and the sheer relief, I felt humanity coming back to me, God, almost instantly. And my grandpa came to visit me, and I was so pleased. You know, and the physio came while my grandpa was there, and my grandpa didn't like hospitals much either, and the physio said they would come back the next day to see if I could climb stairs, and then they would let me home. And he said, well, if he can climb them just now, I'll take him home. But they wouldn't let him, and I would have went home right there and then. I got home, and it was difficult because I wasn't allowed to sit for, I think it was something like 6 weeks or something, or 4 weeks, I can't quite remember. I had to rest and recuperate for 18 weeks, but it was a long period where I was only allowed to stand or lie down. So I would get visitors, but I had to greet them lying down, and then trying to eat your dinner standing up is quite hard. Because even if you've got a dinner table, you actually have to pile the books. You have to pile books up. Like we'd get encyclopedias and things, and so I could set my dinner plate on and be at some sort of normal height. So that was tricky. But one of the worst periods was about to happen. About a week after coming out of hospital, I started to get these raging stomach cramps and night sweats. Like my bedclothes would be soaking wet, and it was, you know, chronic headaches, and just I wasn't allowed to sit, but I was bent double because my stomach was so sore, and my mum actually phoned the doctor to come out to see me, and I think the doctor came out thinking he was coming to see somebody who had an operation and something had went wrong with it. But when he came in and I explained, they said to me, right, okay, so what did you have? Did you have morphine in hospital? And yeah, and I told him I had a lot of morphine. And he said, what were you taking beforehand? And I told him about the cocodamol. And probably for the first time, again, I said, I wouldn't say I was an addict, but I didn't come clean about how much I was taking to people, because I didn't want to worry people, and I didn't want them to stop me taking them because I relied on them so much. But I kind of told the doctor, right, here's the amount of cocodamol I've been on. And he said, how much have you taken since coming out of the hospital? And I said, virtually none, because the sciatica's gone. He said, yeah, you've been on morphine in the hospital, which is an opioid. It's as close, it's like medical heroin. And you've been on cocodamol for 1.5 years, and it is an opioid. So you are going through cold turkey. And you know, I had to get things to help my stomach, you know, and help with the night sweats and things that normally they would give to people that were possibly heroin addicts, because I was going through a serious cold turkey. And that was as hard as the hospital. And even now I'm always conscious, if I'm taking painkillers, how many I'm taking or how long I've been taking them. And if you've ever seen Trainspotting as well, an unfortunate side effect of coming off all those painkillers is Man, you need to go to the toilet an awful lot. If you've ever seen Trainspotting, when you've seen Ewan McGregor's character when he tries to come off them and he has to run to the loo, that's pretty much what it's like. But imagine trying to do that when you've just had a hole drilled in your spine and you're not really allowed to sit down. And you can't really twist round to clean yourself or whatever, and it makes it very difficult. But I came through that, and as I've said earlier, I didn't really do anything about the weight. I kind of went back. I can't thank the doctors enough, because I got my life back pretty quickly. But it cost a lot of things. It cost my band. I played with them for another year, but do you know what? I had been under so much stress that I think there was a time with a disagreement, and I just jacked it in because I just couldn't take any more stress. I actually just wanted to have a life where, you know, I didn't have to think about anything difficult, because it had just been difficult for 2 or 3 years. As a young man, I just didn't have the capacity to deal with it, and that's a shame, because my band shouldn't have ended like that. It eventually killed my relationship, which, do you know, sliding doors moment. If it was the best thing, because I now have a beautiful wife and child who are the centre of my life, you know. So sliding doors, that was maybe a blessing in disguise. But I kind of just enjoyed life, and that's probably why I never did anything about the weight, probably for a couple of years. You know, I was aware, sometimes you kid yourself, you're lighter than you think, and I probably did a bit, but I just enjoyed life. I had such a miserable 2.5 years. I just wanted to be happy, and I got back, I finished my nursery qualification, and I was instantly a much better student, much better person. I was happier to be around. But I was walking down the street, I think it was maybe about 2 years after, maybe about 2003. I was walking down the street, and it was like March, so it wasn't warm, and I was wearing a t-shirt, and I think I had a rucksack on. And I got down the street, and I actually noticed this sweat was pouring out of me, and do you know what? It was simply because of my size. And that night, you know, I just bit the bullet, and I thought, this can't go on. I can't be like this. I used to run stupid amounts. I used to play football stupid amounts. You know, need to do something about it. And I went in Weight Watchers, believe it or not, and I actually lost. Maybe I have to give Weight Watchers its due. It helped me get my calorie control back a wee bit, and I lost a good 4 stone. I think when I went to Weight Watchers and stood in the scales, I was 19.5 stone. So that would give you an impression. The size that I'd went to, considering where I was before. I was never a slim Jim, don't give me that impression, probably closer to maybe a rugby player's build or whatever, but no, I was huge. But I lost that, and then it plateaued for a long time, but I never bothered because I'd lost so much weight, and I went back to playing football. Another thing I lost, I mean, I'm not saying I would have won the World Cup or anything, don't get me wrong, I'm not that big-headed, but I could have played football at a decent level, but it was taken away by just what happened to me. But I played for my university for a while, and I played for my amateur team, and I ran an amateur team for a while, and my health and fitness basically were okay, and my weight was okay. Considering what you see now in the streets, I still wasn't that heavy, but I got into cycling. I was actually interested first, it was the Lance Armstrong story at first, although of course we know what's happened since, although I still think his comeback is a bit of an inspiration. But it was watching Mark Beaumont, the adventurer, cycling around the world, and another thing I watched, my dad took a group of school children from Land's End to John O'Groats, and I went to see them finish, and it was just so inspiring. And I bought a second-hand mountain bike off one of my best friends, Chris, and just got into it more and more, and just started getting further and further, and you know, over the years, and I went and got a cyclocross bike because I wanted to try a wee bit of cycling to work, and then I started doing road cycling, and what became a wee added bonus for a pastime is, I think sometimes a bit of an obsession. 10,000 kilometres a year isn't unheard of. I race, and I've gotten used to not winning much, if anything, but I love racing cyclocross, and I've done that for 10 years, and I never thought I would do that, and I've had to tell myself as well, I've had to teach myself that coming 47th in a cyclocross race could be disappointing, but remember, you beat all the people on the couch, and you know what, just remember that day in hospital. Would you have been able to come 47th in a cyclocross race that day? In fact, I actually came second in a cyclocross race once, and I had a wee cry coming over the line because it was after 9 or 10 years of trying that I got a podium, so I was pleased. Now, I've won a couple of wee mountain bike races and things, but it's an obsession. I love doing road miles, and it's not just about the fitness when I do the road miles. It's like having a psychiatrist. It's where I go and sort out all my thoughts. If I'm having a bad day, it turns it into a good day. If I've had a rubbish day at work, a rubbish week at work, or something's bothering me, if I go out on the bike, I can work through all those thoughts and come back home fresh. I love commuting to work because I arrive having some fresh air in the morning, and sometimes the roads I've taken to work at the back roads, I've seen amazing things. Like the other day there, I saw I heard a deer jump across the road in front of me, and a fox and 2 quick kestrels in the same ride. So I mean, you arrive at work having seen that. And then if you have a bad day at work, if you've got your wee 10 miles before you go home, you arrive home fresh, don't need to head out for a workout because you've had it, and it just makes me feel better. I couldn't live without cycling now. Sometimes I have to tell myself to take a break from it, but I just couldn't live without it. But I've went from, again, the cycling pushed me on that a little bit further, and now I'm sitting probably about 13 stone, and I'd say my features are a bit more chiselled. You can see down my face the difference that cycling has made. Unfortunately, I think although they've got less over the years, I think just that 2 years of eating as a hobby and sitting because I had to has just left some love handles where the stretch marks are there. I don't think they're going anywhere. I think it would take almost starvation to get rid of them, and to be honest, I still like my food. So you've got to have a balance between being healthy and fit, but also enjoying your life. And I do a lot of it just because I want to do that. I want to enjoy life. I've got a beautiful family, and I want to live as long as I possibly can with them. But I just made this wee film because it's been 20 years since my operation, and it was such a defining moment. And I always try, if not on the day, but as close to the day as possible, I try to do a cycle every year on the 14th of May, just because I can. And I don't always need it to be a big long cycle. I have done things like that. This year I cycled to work on the 14th of May and cycled back, and then the next day was a Saturday, so I went and did 50 miles there. And again, these aren't the biggest cycles I've done, but if I can cycle on these days, then it just says I still can. And for the last 20 years I've got better every single year, fitness or even as a human being. There's things I would take back. I would love my hairline back, but that's not happening. But there was a confidence, virgin and arrogance sometimes, that I had before the operation, that I sometimes wish I still had. And it just doesn't seem the same. Obviously, it kind of brought an end. I felt as if it kind of brought an end to my youth a lot quicker than other people's. But it's a funny one because it was horrible to go through, but it's made me the person I am, and I learned so many valuable lessons from it. I think from that I've learned never, ever, ever to take for granted your health. Because see, if you lose it, it's so hard to get back. So never take it for granted. And that experience has taught me that, and it taught me at an early point, so maybe it's rescued me. And for the next 20 years, I've got better. So I can only hope that in another 20 years, in the next third of my life, I can continue to make improvements, both physically and as a person. You know, they say that all the things that get worse as you get older can get better with exercise. So I just have to keep saying to myself to take care of myself, to exercise the right amount. You know, if you don't use it, you lose it, as they say. And hopefully when I'm 61, I can look back at the previous 20 years and be as happy again with the change that's happened in the last 20. And I hope the wheels can just keep turning.